Before they wore the presidential sash, they were something else: soldiers, rebels, businessmen, priests, ex-generals, royal heirs, IMF economists, and even coup makers. Some inherited power, some bought it, some fought for it with bullets, and others negotiated it behind closed doors. To understand how Africa is ruled today, you must first understand who these men and women were before they ever touched power, because no president begins at the palace. They arrive there carrying a past that still shapes their nations. Here is a list of the 54 presidents from Africa. At number 54, Egypt, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Before taking Egypt's highest seat, Sisi wasn't a politician. He was a power broker in uniform, a career army officer who rose quietly through the ranks. He became defense minister under President Morsi. When nationwide unrest erupted, Sisi led the military takeover in 2013, removing the very leader he once served. His background in military intelligence trained him to use order and control, the same themes that define his rule today. At number 53, Algeria, Abdelmadjid Tebboune. Before the presidency, Tebboune spent decades inside Algeria's political machinery. He served as housing minister, then prime minister, chosen and removed by the same ruling elite that later brought him to power after mass protests ended Bouteflika's era. His rise wasn't through popular mobilization, but through survival inside a deep state that rarely lets outsiders in. At number 52, Morocco, King Mohammed VI. Unlike elected presidents, Mohammed VI did not campaign. He inherited rule. But before the throne, he was groomed for power in elite military and diplomatic academies, managing royal investments worth billions. Even before becoming king, he was already one of Africa's wealthiest men, a businessman prince who controlled the economy long before he controlled the constitution. At number 51, Tunisia, Kais Saied. Before storming into politics, Saied was a constitutional law professor, a quiet academic who lectured about legality. Ironically, the same man who taught law is now accused of stretching it. His outsider image helped him ride post-revolution anger into power, but his legal background armed him with the knowledge to dismantle institutions while staying within the text. At number 50, Libya, Mohammed al-Menfi, interim. Before being chosen in the UN-backed process, al-Menfi lived a diplomatic life far from battlefields. He served as ambassador in Greece until he was expelled amid political tensions. Unlike Libya's warlords, he did not rise by force but by compromise, which critics call weakness in a country dominated by men with guns. At number 49, Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Before seizing leadership, Burhan was an army general shaped by Sudan's long wars. He commanded troops during the Darfur conflict and later headed the Transitional Military Council after ousting Omar al-Bashir. His military upbringing made power feel like a battlefield objective, which is why Sudan's transition never truly transitioned. At number 48, Mauritania, Mohamed Ould Ghazouani. Before the presidency, Ghazouani was not a civilian. He was army chief and intelligence insider, the right-hand man of former President Ould Abdelaziz. When term limits forced Aziz out, Ghazouani inherited the system, not the people's revolution. He didn't overthrow the regime. He continued it in a cleaner suit. At number 47, Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Before reaching Aso Rock, Tinubu built his influence from behind the curtain. He was a wealthy power broker, former Lagos governor, and the political godfather who made presidents before becoming one. A former accountant with deep business ties, his rise was not accidental. It was engineered through networks, loyalty trades, and decades of king-making. At number 46, Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo. Before power, Akufo-Addo lived in the courtroom and diplomatic halls. A human rights lawyer and foreign minister, he built his image as a defender of democracy, even as opponents accuse him of governing with the same elite class he once criticized. His journey to the presidency was not a revolution, but a return of the political aristocracy. At number 45, Senegal, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Before shocking the world with his election, Faye was a tax inspector and anti-system activist jailed by the same state he now rules. His background was not in generals or billionaires, but in files, audits, and whistleblowing, which is precisely why many believe the establishment never saw him coming. At number 44, Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara. Before power, Ouattara was not a street politician. He was an economist inside the IMF and former prime minister. A man trained in Western financial institutions, he returned home with the language of markets and reforms. Critics argue he runs Ivory Coast like a corporate boardroom, efficient but tightly controlled. At number 43, Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio. Before the presidency, Bio already tasted power as a military ruler in 1996. He later reinvented himself as a civilian Democrat, but his background in the barracks shaped his governing style. Direct, forceful, and suspicious of opposition, traits soldiers rarely unlearn. At number 42, Liberia, Joseph Boakai. Before sitting at the top, Boakai spent 12 years as vice president and decades in public administration. He is not a revolutionary outsider, but a quiet survivor of the old order. The system man who outlived every stronger player until power finally fell to him. At number 41, Guinea, Mamadi Doumbouya. Before becoming head of state, Doumbouya commanded the special forces, the most loyal guns in the country. Trained in France and Afghanistan, he didn't negotiate for power. He simply walked into the palace and took it. His background is not politics, it is force. At number 40, Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. Before being Africa's youngest head of state, Traoré was a little-known army captain. He did not build a party, write a manifesto, or run a campaign. He led an uprising against another coup leader. His path to power was not a rise, it was a takeover. At number 39, Mali Assimi Goïta. Before ruling Mali, Goïta was a colonel trained in counterterrorism. When politicians failed to stop jihadists, he stepped in the way soldiers do by removing them. His military background taught him that security comes before democracy, a belief reflected in every decision he makes. At number 38, Niger, Abdourahmane Tiani. Before ruling Niger, Tiani headed the Presidential Guard, the literal last line between a leader and a bullet. When he turned on his own president in 2023, it proved one truth of African politics. Sometimes the man meant to protect you is the one who replaces you. At number 37, Gambia, Adama Barrow. Before leadership, Barrow was not a general or dynasty heir. He was a real estate businessman in the UK. His campaign was born from protest, not privilege. But critics now argue he governs with the same class he once opposed. At number 36, Guinea-Bissau, Umaro Sissoko Embalo. Before the presidency, he was prime minister and a political scientist trained abroad. His military ties and diplomatic connections helped him navigate one of Africa's most coup-prone states, not through force, but through alliances. At number 35, Benin, Patrice Talon. Before power, Talon was known as the King of Cotton, a billionaire industrialist whose wealth shaped elections long before he entered them. His presidency is often described as the moment the sponsor decided to become the candidate. At number 34, Togo, Faure Gnassingbé. Before becoming president, Faure was simply the son of the president. Groomed in Western schools and given ministerial posts, he inherited power after his father, proving that in some African states, leadership is not won, it is transferred. At number 33, Kenya, William Ruto. Before occupying State House, Ruto was a businessman and a longtime political insider disguised as an underdog. He rose from selling chickens to becoming deputy president, a man who studied power from the passenger seat before grabbing the wheel. His pre-presidency career was a blend of wealth building, alliances, and courtroom battles, training him to fight politically with both money and survival instinct. At number 32, Uganda, Yoweri Museveni. Before becoming one of Africa's longest rulers, Museveni was a rebel commander who fought his way into Kampala in 1986. His legitimacy began with bullets, not ballots, and that shaped the state he later built. What started as a liberation mission gradually became a system where the gun still sits above the Constitution. At number 31, Rwanda, Paul Kagame. Before leading Rwanda, Kagame was the silent commander who ended the 1994 genocide by force. Trained in guerrilla warfare, intelligence, and statecraft, he built discipline long before he built a nation. His military background explains why Rwanda today feels tightly managed, efficient, controlled, and intolerant of uncertainty. At number 30, Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan. Before becoming East Africa's first female head of state, Samia was vice president, a public administrator, and a long-serving parliamentarian. She rose through bureaucracy, not rebellion, which is why her leadership style is quieter, calculated, and more diplomatic than the strongman she replaced. At number 29, Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed. Before taking command, Abiy was an intelligence officer and cyber operations strategist, a man raised inside the state's listening rooms. His background in surveillance and counterinsurgency explains both his bold reforms and the hard-edged crackdowns that followed once resistance emerged. At number 28, Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. Before presidency, he was a civil society leader, educator, and university founder. Unlike generals around him, he built influence through negotiation, mediation, and network skills that became necessary in a country where force alone cannot govern. At number 27, South Sudan, Salva Kiir. Before leading the world's newest country, Kiir was a rebel commander in the SPLA for decades. His authority was born in the trenches of a liberation war, not in parliament halls, which is why peace and politics in South Sudan still operate with military logic. At number 26, Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki. Before becoming one of Africa's most entrenched rulers, Afwerki led the Eritrean independence movement through decades of war. He never transitioned from commander to statesman. He simply replaced a colonial ruler with a revolutionary one, keeping the country permanently mobilized. At number 25, Seychelles, Wavel Ramkalawan. Before power, Ramkalawan was not a businessman or soldier. He was an Anglican priest and longtime opposition voice. His pulpit was his first podium, and criticism of the government was his early political training. Preaching prepared him to confront, not to conform. At number 24, Cameroon, Paul Biya. Before becoming Africa's second longest-serving ruler, Biya was prime minister under Ahmadou Ahidjo, handpicked and groomed by the old regime. He inherited a functioning state and turned longevity into strategy. His pre-presidency years inside the inner circle taught him the most important rule of autocracy: outlive everyone. At number 23, Chad, Mohamed Idris Deby. Before ruling, Mohamed was a general in charge of the elite presidential guard. He did not enter politics. He inherited the war machine his father built. When Idris Deby was killed on the battlefield in 2021, the son stepped in without an election, proving that in some states, leadership passes like a military will. At number 22, Central African Republic, Faustin Archange Touadéra. Before power, Touadéra was not a general or tycoon. He was a university mathematics professor and later prime minister. He entered politics as a technocrat, but surviving Central African politics required more than numbers. It required alliances with armed groups and foreign mercenaries. At number 21, Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo. Before ruling for over 4 decades, Obiang was a military officer who overthrew his own uncle in a violent coup in 1979. His regime was built not from ideology, but from fear and oil money, skills he learned in the barracks before the palace. At number 20, Gabon, Brice Oligui Nguema. Before becoming transitional head of state, Oligui was commander of the Republican Guard, the same elite force protecting the presidency he later seized. He removed Ali Bongo not as an enemy, but as a relative insider who knew exactly where weakness lived. At number 19, Republic of Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso. Before returning to power in 1997, Sassou was already president once, and before that, a military officer shaped by Marxist rule and Cold War alliances. His survival across regimes comes from one lesson he learned early: power is never lost if you control the guns. At number 18, Democratic Republic of Congo, Félix Tshisekedi. Before presidency, Tshisekedi was an opposition figure shaped by legacy, not struggle, the son of Etienne Tshisekedi, Congo's most famous dissident. He did not take power by force or wealth, but through a disputed election deal that critics say was negotiated, not won. At number 17, South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. Before becoming president, Ramaphosa lived 2 different lives, first as a militant union leader who fought apartheid on the streets, then as a billionaire tycoon who sat in boardrooms with global corporations. He didn't just join the system, he learned how to own it. His pre-power years taught him both agitation and negotiation, a dual identity that now defines how he governs. At number 16, Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa. Before replacing Mugabe, Mnangagwa was his shadow, intelligence chief, security enforcer, and longtime political survivor known as the Crocodile. He didn't arrive as a reformer from outside, but as the system's most loyal architect. His path to power was not a break from the past, it was the past rebranded. At number 15, Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema. Before the presidency, HH was a self-made businessman and one of the richest men in Zambia. He ran cattle ranches, investment firms, and contested elections 5 times before finally winning. His rise was not backed by force or dynasty, but by persistence and by wealth strong enough to outlast defeat. At number 14, Namibia, Nangolo Mbumba. Before assuming office after Hage Geingobe's death, Mbumba spent decades inside the ruling SWAPO system, minister, party secretary, and vice president. He did not emerge from rebellion or crisis, but from loyalty and internal succession, a continuation of the liberation generation's rule. At number 13, Botswana, Mokgweetsi Masisi. Before becoming president, Masisi was a teacher, then a diplomat, then vice president. He rose through soft power rather than military or money, proving that in Botswana, unlike many states, civilian institutions still produce leaders. At number 12, Angola, João Lourenço. Before power, Lourenço was a general and defense minister inside the MPLA structure that had ruled since independence. He did not overthrow the system, he inherited it. But his military background prepared him to later challenge the same elites who put him there, particularly the Dos Santos dynasty. At number 11, Mozambique, Filipe Nyusi. Before leadership, Nyusi served as defense minister and was deeply involved in Frelimo party structures. His path was the classic post-liberation template, military influence first, political office after, ensuring continuity over change. At number 10, Madagascar, Andry Rajoelina. Before the presidency, Rajoelina built his influence through media and business, a young entrepreneur who later seized power through a coup at age 34. He proved that in Madagascar, media control and streets can replace ballots when timing favors ambition. At number 9, Lesotho, Sam Matekane. Before office, Matekane was a billionaire industrialist, the country's richest man. He built airlines, mining companies, and logistics empires before building a movement. His presidency is the story of a businessman who decided to buy clean governance because nobody else could deliver it. At number 8, Eswatini, King Mswati III. Before ruling, there was no before he inherited the throne as a teenager. But his upbringing inside royal privilege trained him early in absolute power, wealth management, and traditional monarchy, a background that explains why democracy never arrived in his kingdom. At number 7, Mauritius, Prithviraj Singh Raopin. Before the ceremonial presidency, Raopin was a lawyer, minister, and longtime parliamentarian. He was not chosen by public uprising, but by political consensus, a stabilizer, not a disruptor. At number 6, Cabo Verde, José Maria Neves. Before he became president, Neves had already ruled the country once as prime minister for 15 years. A professor by training, he rose through the ruling party machine, not a mass movement. His return to power as president shows how in small island nations, politics is often a rotation of familiar faces rather than new forces. At number 5, São Tomé and Príncipe, Carlos Villanova. Before office, Villanova was an engineer and businessman who managed telecom and infrastructure sectors before entering government. He later served as minister, but never led a mass political uprising. He climbed through quiet technocracy and elite backing rather than street legitimacy. At number 4, Djibouti, Ismail Omar Guelleh. Before becoming president, Guelleh was head of intelligence and the right hand of his uncle, the country's former leader. He inherited the state's security architecture before inheriting the state itself, a reminder that in Djibouti, intelligence power is more important than electoral power. At number 3, Burundi, Evariste Ndayishimiye. Before ruling, Ndayishimiye was a general in the civil war and later secretary general of the ruling party. He did not emerge from reform movements. He came from the same armed structures that controlled Burundi for 2 decades, which is why critics see his presidency as continuity, not change. At number 2, Comoros, Azali Assoumani. Before power, Assoumani was an army officer who first took control through a coup in 1999. He later reinvented himself as a civilian Democrat, but his military upbringing never left his politics. In Comoros, he is remembered not as a newcomer, but as a comeback ruler. Finally, at number 1, Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera. Before winning office, Chakwera was not a lifelong politician. He was a theologian and leader of the Assemblies of God Church. He entered politics late, but rose fast through moral branding. Yet critics now argue he governs with the same elites he once condemned from the pulpit, the same themes that define his rule today.